Hello, JBS viewers. I'm David Harris, and this is Defending Israel. Many of you I know will immediately recognize the name David Friedman. From 2017 to 2021, he was the U.S. ambassador to Israel appointed by President Donald Trump. Since then, he has written a book, Sledgehammer, with another book coming out as well. David, welcome to Defending Israel.
Thank you, David. It's good to be with you.
We are recording this interview on May the 7th, which is by coincidence exactly 7 months to the day since the genocidal massacre on October the 7th. Could I ask you, for starters, David, it was a Shabbat, it was a Simchat Torah. Where were you? When did you first hear the news? And what was your initial reaction?
So I was in Jerusalem, and it was probably, it was Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeret in Israel. They combined those days. It's a odd construct for Americans because on the one hand you're saying Yizkor, you're saying memorial prayer for family members passed away, and also you're rejoicing with the renewal of the Torah. So it's always a big day in Israel, bigger than in America, because you combine the two holidays. At around 7 o'clock, my phone started ringing, and I don't normally answer the phone on Shabbat, but after it kept ringing and ringing, I looked at it and I saw it was from my security detail in Israel, and I picked it up and they told me, don't leave the house. And then they sent me videos. This was maybe 7:30 in the morning. Sent me videos of Jeeps running through the southern towns with Hamas terrorists with machine guns. I mean, they had real-time film of what was going on. I stayed home that day. I obviously stayed close to the news. And, my memory of it really was the conversation I had with I think she was then 12-year-old granddaughter who was with me. We had a bunch of grandchildren there with us and kids. And as we were running in and out of shelters, she asked me, she said, Saba, why are there people out there who want to kill us? They don't even know us. They don't know who we are. They don't know anything about us, but they want to kill us. And why is that? And it's a very hard conversation to have with a young child who's old enough to understand, but not old enough to really understand. And so that's my primary memory. I had hoped, as I'm sure you did and everyone else, that this period of Jewish history was behind us. And regrettably, we learned on that day that it's not.
No, it's true. I've had the same conversations with my Israeli grandchildren, and it's very difficult to explain, in my case, to an 8-year-old, exactly what's going on. David, again, as we speak, Israel has made the decision to go into Rafah. And over the objections of many governments and others who pleaded and begged Israel not to do so, in your judgment, is Israel making the right decision?
Yeah, they're making the right decision, and it's a decision they should have made, 2-3 months ago, were it not for the micromanaging of the war by the American government. The number of visits by Blinken, by Sullivan, by Austin to sit in the war cabinet and really get into the weeds of Israel's war. Which frankly, maybe with the exception of Austin, is not a war that Blinken or Sullivan are really qualified to provide advice. And they I think put enormous pressure on the Israeli government. I think they politicized this more than it should have been. I think they reacted out of fear, electoral fear, from the reaction in the United States, and this took way too long. What's the alternative? There are 4 active Hamas battalions in Rafah right now. That's 4,000 or more active troops with command and control. And we should leave them alone, let them regroup, let them rearm, let them, go out and collect all the, free electron terrorists that are still kind of floating around the Gaza Strip, and come back and slaughter more Jews. I mean, we know what they want to do. They've said what they want to do. The protesters are saying, there ought to be another 10, 100,000 more October 7ths. Israel doesn't have a choice from a military perspective, also from the perspective of its own citizenship, which refuses, uh, correctly so, to live side by side with Hamas. And the quicker they would have gotten this over with, the quicker all the protesters would have identified another Marxist grievance for them to jump on, and we would be done with this. But instead, this has been, this has been prolonged and stretched out and politicized. And thank God they finally are going in. I wish they had done it sooner.
David, you speak about American micromanagement, and I'd like to explore that further, but let me just take a step back. For many, the narrative was, after October 7th, admiration for the way President Biden initially responded. His visit to Israel, the sending of weapons, the troop carriers that were there. Do you agree with that early assessment of the Biden administration's response and believe that at some point it shifted? Or do you think that early assessment was a bit too effusive?
So in those early days, if you look at my Twitter feed, I was very complimentary of the Biden administration. I believe in hakarat hatov. I believe that even your political rivals, if they do the right thing, you owe it. If you're going to be credible, you should point that out. And I expressed my thanks to the Biden administration for their initial response, for sending over the carrier strike forces into the Eastern Mediterranean. And everybody I knew, all my friends on the right said, just wait, just you wait. And I said, okay, listen, if things change, I will call that out as well. But they haven't changed yet. Well, they certainly did change. They changed rather quickly. I would say 2 or 3 weeks into it, I believe that the political team, the Biden's political team, I think they looked him in the eye and said, look, you can't keep this up. You have an election to win, and you are losing a significant number of young voters that you need to get reelected. And then, we have that whole, pivot, and the pivot was pretty stark, and it's gotten worse and worse. And as there's over the last couple of days, there have been reports that the United States is withholding weaponry from Israel. I understand, by the way, it's very important weaponry for Israel to minimize civilian casualties. It's weaponry that allows Israel to strike, in a very surgical manner and avoid civilian casualties, and they're holding that back. I pointed out yesterday that and I don't want to get too partisan, but I pointed out yesterday that withholding weapons from an ally for political purposes was exactly the accusation made against Donald Trump for which he was impeached. So you would think there would be more sensitivity to this.
Right, regarding Ukraine.
Regarding Ukraine, exactly. And you would think there would be more sensitivity to this issue. But look, Israel's going to win this war with or without American help. They're going to protect their citizens as any other country must. And we'll try to repair those relationships as quickly as possible, hopefully with a new administration.
Ultimately, it's going to be Israel's decision to make, David, but do you have thoughts, having been a veteran now of 4 years on the ground as the U.S. ambassador to Israel, about what the day after could and should look like? Well, look,
I don't know that there will be a day after. I think people talk about that, and as a shorthand reference, it's okay. But this is going to be an evolutionary process that will take years, not months, not days. So I'm not sure what that actual day is, the day after, because they'll go into Rafah. They will hopefully quickly and safely eliminate the Hamas terrorists. Hopefully, they will capture or kill Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif, and hopefully they will free hostages in the process as well. We're all praying for all those things to happen. But let's say that all happens. There's still going to be there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of terrorists around. There's still a lot of people who are unhappy. And how does that all work? Well, look, I'm not optimistic that the Arab world is going to really come to Israel's assistance. Maybe writing checks. Maybe there'll be some checks that get written to rebuild Gaza. But who's going to make sure that Gaza remains demilitarized, and non-threatening to Israel. Right now, there's really no one other than Israel who can do that, who can assure that. I mean, I think it would be great if the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Saudis would all get together and say, we're going to create a force that will police Gaza and make sure that it is non-threatening to Israel. I'm not sure they're going to do it. I'm not sure why they would want to do it. I think this is going to be Israel's problem, and so I think there'll be a military presence there for quite some time. The United Nations has proven itself to be untrustworthy, worse than untrustworthy. So I'm not sure what to do with them. Look, remember, David, that when the Lebanon War ended in 2006, the UNIFIL was brought in, to make sure that Hezbollah didn't rearm. Right? They did such a great job that Hezbollah now has the second most powerful military in the Middle East. So you can't trust the United Nations. I'm not sure that Egypt or Saudi is going to come in. If they did, that would be great. I think the Egyptians in particular would know how to keep the peace. And it's Israel's problem more than anyone else's. So I don't know. I think Israel is going to probably, for some short period of time, certainly, and maybe a longer period of time, be in charge with some civilian authority that probably has to be cobbled together to find a way to spend the money in a way that's helpful to the people of Gaza and non-threatening to Israel.
A very sobering analysis, David. You mentioned Egypt, so can we stick with Egypt for just a moment? Few people are asking what should be an obvious question, at least to me. With Egypt just on the other side of the border of Rafah, why is it that Egypt has not opened its border, at least temporarily, to civilians? Israel is encouraging civilians to leave, to get out of harm's way, and then to return afterwards. Instead, Egypt is building higher and higher walls with more and more barbed wire. How do you explain Egypt's role in this story? And secondly, the failure to really spend a lot of time in the international community talking about the Egyptian role?
Well, look, I've had these conversations with the Egyptians often when I was ambassador. Not in the context of rebuilding Gaza, but in the context of creating some economic opportunities in Gaza. We made some very generous proposals to the Egyptians to try to find a way, for the Palestinians in Gaza to leave, their enclave, to go into maybe El Arish in that area to work on maybe a gas pipeline or some other things that we talked about. The Egyptians had no interest. Their view is not one Gazan is to ever enter Egypt. Number one, they feel once they enter, they'll never return to Gaza. Number two, they know who the people of Gaza are. I mean, in the West, we like to create this dichotomy between, the good Gazans and the bad Gazans, and between, Hamas and, holding hostage 2 million people. I mean, some of that is true. It's not completely fictitious, but most of the Gaza Strip, I think the Egyptians recognize, has been radicalized, and it's been radicalized by people who are aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. That's what Hamas is. It's an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood is the arch enemy of the Egyptian government. I mean, that's Mohammed Morsi, who won an election and was going to turn Egypt into an Islamic state until President al-Sisi came along and undemocratically deposed him. And then al-Sisi from there won some elections, but they don't want anybody from Gaza coming into Egypt, because these are people that they know who they are much better than we do, much better than the Israelis do. They know who they are. They know these are people that will seek to overthrow the government of Egypt. So I understand their view. And I think, it's a wake-up call to everyone else. All of us kind of, for lack of a better word, all of us dummies in the West who think that, people are all the same. And if you can just offer them a nice house and a cup of coffee, they'll end their malign activity. The Egyptians know better, and they're right. And it is a radicalized population that is going to require, I think, a generation or more of effort to really stabilize.
Let's talk about a second Arab country, David, Qatar. Again, Qatar has played a funding role vis-a-vis Gaza, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood more generally. And yet it very skillfully presents itself as a country that hosts the World Cup, that's a friendly negotiator between all parties, and that has been elevated to non-NATO, a major ally status by the current US administration. And of course, we've also learned through the work of ISGAP, an organization that I'm involved with, chaired by Natan Sharansky, that Qatar funding is very much alive and well in American universities, and often to questionable ends. Are we getting Qatar right in Washington? And if not, why not?
Well, the second answer to your question, if not, why not, is easy. I mean, they're spending billions of dollars in protecting their relationships with, I think, both sides of the aisle. Look, they're a very small country, a very exposed country, if you will. They're smack in a region which, certainly they're very close to Iran, and they're very much in harm's way. They've had very difficult relations with the Saudis, with the Egyptians. So, it's a country of something like 250,000 people with unlimited funds. They've spent that money in many, many different directions to try to gain as much support, diplomatic support, academic support, intellectual support, as possible. I understand why they're doing all that. Before I dump on them, which emotionally I'd like to do because they enable Ismail Haniyeh and Khaled Mashal to live in the lap of luxury in Doha. I would say that they've also been a participant with Israel, with Israel being a willing participant in the attempts to stabilize the Gaza Strip. So what happens is, when Gaza starts to flare up, it's often because of a dispute between the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. The PA controls the funds that go into Hamas. They collect money, and then, Israel collects money, gives it to the PA, and then the PA has money to give to Hamas. When the PA decides they want to hold that back, and Hamas starts to get angry, Hamas points its rockets at Israel. And there is a way to quiet that down by simply spreading some money around. So with the approval of the Israeli government, a couple of sheikhs will come in from Qatar with suitcases full of cash into Gaza, spread it around, and then things quiet down. So, it's a little bit more complicated than just saying, these are bad people. They play lots of different roles. Whether they've balanced that correctly, I certainly have my doubts. I want to know more. I mean, I never really focused much on Qatar when I was in government. I want to know more. I'm disappointed, obviously, with the outcome of their inability to push Hamas in a direction that we would have liked. Obviously, the hostage situation has been a complete disaster. So, I would say I'm negative, but I also want to understand more. I met with Qatari sheikhs, in Jerusalem. They would stop off in Gaza, drop off some money, and then come to Jerusalem. And we had these meetings. Some of them were covert, although it's not. I don't think it was much of. We didn't meet. We met in a hotel. It wasn't like we were really trying to hide it. And I got their perspective, and their perspective was, we want to be friends with everybody and try to, use our position and our wealth to create some stability. They didn't get it right, but Israel didn't get it right. So before I, start pointing fingers at Qatar, I mean, we have to really do a real deep dive into how this happened. And I have no doubt that a lot of the fault lies with Israel as well, much as I hate to say it because I love the country, but this was a colossal failure on the part of the Israeli government. I don't think anybody questions that.
I appreciate that, David. Let's turn our attention for a moment to Iran. And let me ask you whether you think the current U.S. administration is getting policy on Iran right or not. Obviously, there was a contrast between the Obama years and the Trump years. What are your thoughts today? Are we getting it right?
No, and I think this has been the seminal failure of foreign policy in the Biden administration. Look, we imposed massive sanctions on Iran when we were in office. I can tell you just without getting into details, the amount of effort taken by the U.S. Treasury in conjunction with the Mossad and other agencies to identify Iranian assets and to impose sanctions and to arrest, shipments and to seize bank accounts. It was a daily process, and when we left office, Iran was pretty close to broke. Pretty close to broke. I mean, I don't have the statistics offhand. I used to know them, by heart, but selling very, very, very little oil, very, very little oil revenues. Those sanctions aren't being enforced anymore. The Iranian economy, certainly the sale of oil to Russia and to China has grown massively. They're a wealthy country, and they're taking this money. They're not using it to build hospitals or schools. They're taking the money and they're funding the Houthis. They're funding Iraqi Hezbollah. They're funding Syria. They're funding Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're funding Hamas. They are the lubricant for all of the malign behavior in the crescent of the Middle East, and in particular, I think that we know that they trained the Hamas terrorists, and it's certainly doubtful that October 7th could have occurred without their training, without their funding. So this is the easiest question you've asked me so far. Did we get it wrong on Iran? Yeah, we got it massively wrong on Iran. The Trump administration took Qasem Soleimani, off the field. And we stood strong against their response, which was pretty muted, given what America did, because they were afraid. We knew they were afraid of us. They're not afraid of America anymore. And Biden has reversed everything. The only thing Biden hasn't reversed is bringing Qasem Soleimani back to life. I mean, other than that, he's done everything else to undo everything we've done. And I think the results, speak for themselves. The world's a much more dangerous place.
Noted. Let me switch for a moment. I think any fair-minded friend of Israel, whether Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, would have to give enormous credit to the Trump administration for the Abraham Accords. You were a key player in the whole process. How have those four countries, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and to the extent we can follow Sudan today, how have they responded since October the 7th? Are they holding to their pledges? Are they weakening in their pledges? And then, of course, before we end, I want to get to the big enchilada, and that is Saudi Arabia.
So I think that the Abraham Accords have held and will hold. After, if you remember, there was in 2021 there was kind of a mini war between Israel and Hamas. And
Yes.
of course, in the UAE, they were getting all their news from Al Jazeera. So right after the war ended, I went to Abu Dhabi. I met with the foreign minister, and I asked him, how are we doing? And he said to me, look, these were his words. He said, we passed with flying colors. And I said, well, why do you think that is? He says, because everybody knows who you're fighting. We know who you're fighting. They're not our friends either. And we know this is going to come up. It's not like we went into the Abraham Accords with the sense that Hamas was going to stand down and there weren't going to be flare-ups. We knew this would happen, and so we were expecting it. And it's difficult. It places stress on the relationships among the people, but it's not going to change our commitments under the Abraham Accords. Those are forever. That was the one direct conversation I had with an Abraham Accords country. Bahrain is the same. Morocco, I think so as well. These nations entered into the Abraham Accords because they saw it as a bulwark against radical Islamic terrorism, and there's no one who exemplifies radical Islamic terrorism more than Hamas. So again, it's hard when the news comes from Al Jazeera. It's hard when the pictures are selected to make it look like Israel is targeting civilians. That's all hard. It's obviously hard when the United States, which people are expecting to stand with Israel, criticizes the way Israel is prosecuting the war. But notwithstanding all of that, I think the Abraham Accords are going to continue to hold. Sudan has their own problems with the civil war. It's kind of hard to handicap that right now, but yeah, they're okay, and I think we created something there that I think has some enduring value.
David, I hope JBS viewers will buy your book Sledgehammer, which came out in 2022, which was about this whole process and behind the scenes. But give us the cliff notes on the following question. How close was the Trump administration to opening the doors with Indonesia and opening the doors with Saudi Arabia?
I think with Saudi Arabia, very close. I think with Indonesia, I'm not sure. We were we were not as far along. Our relationships were not as intimate, I would say. Saudi Arabia, look, they'll be the first to admit they want to normalize relationships with Israel. That is a strategic goal for them. It stabilizes the Middle East to a great extent. It takes the moderate Sunni nations, which all are fearful of Iran, and it places them in a coalition with the strongest military in the region. So it's a good outcome for Saudi Arabia. I know that that's proceeding now. I'm not involved right now in what the Biden administration is trying to do. I think the Saudis are interested in moving forward now because there is a fear that under the Trump administration, Trump would not be able to bring along any Democrats on exactly the same deal. Trump would not be able to bring along Democrats to support a treaty with Saudi Arabia, whereas the Republicans are less strident in their refusal to politicize this. And so I think they think that, with since they'll need 50% of the Republican caucus in the Senate to support a deal, they think it's more gettable, if you will, now with Biden as president. So we'll see how that goes. Look, I'm I'm concerned about what commitments will be asked of Israel vis-a-vis a Palestinian state. I actually think that's coming more from the Biden administration than from the Saudis. Mm-hmm. And I think it could be a very, very dangerous path for Israel to go down. I don't think it's necessary. If a deal is not done and we get back into office, we'll, I think, make the right deal with Saudi Arabia, notwithstanding the politics.
And that actually brings me to my very last question, unfortunately, because we've run out of time and I've got a dozen more questions I'd like to ask you, including about the campus situation here. But let me focus just on this one. There have been reports that Donald Trump is angry at Benjamin Netanyahu, believes that he was among the very first to congratulate Joe Biden after the election in 2020. What can you tell us and our viewers about these reports of bad blood and whether they would spill over if Donald Trump returns to the White House in January of 2025?
So I know it wouldn't spill over because I've had that conversation with him. Look, he was, he didn't particularly like the prime minister's congratulatory video. And it was a raw point for him. He was feeling very aggrieved by the outcome of the election and by the way the election ran. And I think when he saw that, given his relationship up to that point, and he saw kind of the effusive praise, which again, that's what Israel has to do. Israel has a relationship with America, whether the president is Democratic or Republican. I understand what the prime minister did, but it kind of rubbed him the wrong way, but that's all it did. It rubbed him the wrong way. I believe it will have zero effect on the relationship between the countries. I think he understands the relationship between Israel and America is much bigger than how you might feel about a video. And I think he's prepared to, support Israel with Prime Minister Netanyahu as leading the country or anyone else. I just don't think that that's going to have an impact.
I appreciate it, David, and I'm sorry that we have to end here. but I want to thank you. And to JBS viewers, we've just spent the last 30 minutes with David Friedman, who was the U.S. ambassador to Israel during the Trump years. I would encourage you to follow him on X or Twitter. He's active there. I'd encourage you to buy his book, Sledgehammer, about the Abraham Accords. And he has a new book coming out, which you can pre-order on Amazon, if I recall, called The One Jewish State?
One Jewish State.
One Jewish State. JBS viewers, thank you. This is David Harris, defending Israel.